In 2024, I introduce you to Shelve It or Scrap It, a monthly reading challenge where I read randomly selected books from these stacks on the floor of my library. The goal was to get all of the books from the floor onto my shelves or scrapped into my unhaul pile by the end of the year. We started 2024 with 70 books in the stacks, but despite shelving 35 books and scrapping 57 books throughout the year, holding 64 less books than in 2023 and thus making a positive dent in my own TBR as a whole, we actually ended the year with one more book in the stacks than when we started. So in 2025, I have to up my game. The rules remain the same, but I now have to read the same amount of books per episode as I've hauled in the previous month, so that by the end of this year, I will hopefully reach my ultimate goal of getting all of the stacks off the floor and into a proper home, either on my shelves or on somebody else's. In episode 11, we shelved one book and we scrapped 3, and we are starting episode 12 and 2025 with 71 books in the stacks. Happy New Year, friends, and happy new episode of Shelve It or Scrap It. Also, happy new era of Shelve It or Scrap It, because the last time I spoke to you guys, we were talking about the future of this series, about how after I'd filmed my last haul of the year, we are pretty much exactly back where we started at the beginning of the year with 71 books in the stacks. The math ain't mathin', and I will agree it isn't mathin', and I need to get an exact number of the amount of books that we've shelved and the amount of books that we've scrapped across the entire project to date, because I actually think I've scrapped a lot more than I've shelved. I've also scrapped things that weren't part of this project, like I've unhauled a lot, and yet we still somehow, despite me also having hauled like 60 to 70 less books in 2024 than I did in 2023, we've still ended up with exactly the same amount of books pretty much in these stacks, and I don't really know how that has happened. There are certain things, like I've bought duplicates of books that I already own, like collector's editions, special editions, which obviously take up shelf space but don't necessarily add to my TBR because it's a duplicate of a book that I already have. I also have, so one of the carts that I have, I mentioned it in a much earlier episode, maybe like midway throughout the year. There's one that just has books that I kind of want to read but I don't think I'll keep, things like thrillers, literary fiction, contemporary, and I haven't been replacing the books on that cart when I've been reading them because I want to empty that cart eventually and use it as a craft cart. But overall, I'm not really quite sure how we've ended up where we currently are. So last time I left you, we were talking about how we could make this challenge a little bit more productive while still keeping it fun and not overwhelming for me. So the one change that I've made for our second era of Shelve It or Scrap It is that I'm just gonna have to read more books per episode, because I honestly just can't think of any other way to be more productive in this challenge without simply reading more. So I was thinking of like, should I increase it to 5? How are we going to bump the number up slightly? So I have decided that, considering we did 3 minimum books per episode last year and we did still make a positive dent in my own TBR overall, we reduced it by about 20 books, which is the first time it's ever reduced in number. It normally goes up significantly, which is why we're still calling 2024 a win, even though we haven't got all of these books onto shelves. We are going to do something that in theory should just maintain the amount of books that I have, but I think based on our progress last year that it's actually going to reduce the amount of books. So in every episode of Shelve It or Scrap It, starting from this one, I am going to be reading the amount of books that I hauled in the previous month. Now, I've really done myself dirty here because I did not know when I was hauling books last month that this was going to be the way that we did Shelve It or Scrap It going forward. So I think I hauled 6 books last month. I got myself a duplicate edition of Red Rising because I am who I am. And I think in my monthly unboxing, my November unboxing it would have been, I hauled 5 books. So what this is going to do is force me to be mindful about the books that I buy, because I'm going to have to read the same amount of books in Shelve It or Scrap It the following month. So if there's a book that I'm not sure that I need, maybe I'll decide not to buy it, because there's actually going to be concrete consequences of the books that I purchase. Now, we are going to be trialing this for a little bit to start off with, because like I said, I don't want this challenge to become unenjoyable or overwhelming. And essentially in this first episode, straight up, we are doubling the amount of books that I would typically read, and that is a little bit scary for me. So we'll see how it goes, because the most important thing is that I enjoy this task, because if I don't, if it becomes unenjoyable, I'm not actually going to want to continue to commit to it. In theory, all this should do is maintain the amount of books that I have, but I think considering I read less in Shelve It or Scrap It episodes last year, and we still had a positive difference. I think that pushing it to a little bit more books is going to make even more of a positive difference, because I'm actually trying to increase the amount of books that I read overall, and I'm still planning to read other books, of course, the same amount of books outside of Shelve It or Scrap It than I normally would. Whether it works in practice, we will find out. Stay tuned. But for this episode as well, I am doing something a little bit different, because I have asked my patrons to pick the books that I'm reading for this one. So it's a doubly scary episode, because I don't know whether they're going to pick books that they just want me to read because they think that I like them, which will result in more shelves, or whether they're going to be picking books to help me out, like ones that they think that I'm going to scrap to make more progress on this project. So essentially, during our last episode, I was filming my entire own TBR, and I paused midway to update you guys, and I told you that I was putting all of the books that I'd pulled from my bookshelf reorganization into the stacks during the process of filming the entire own TBR video. So what that resulted in is, when I was filming my entire own TBR, there was a section of that video that was just books in the stacks. So like I asked everybody to recommend books that they saw on my TBR during the entire own TBR video, I posted the snippet that was just books in the stacks to my Patreon and asked everybody to leave comments on that video to which books they would like me to read. They had the same options as the entire own TBR, so they could do a comment with a bunch of books in and I would have a bit of choice, or they could do like one book per comment and it would force me to read specific things. And then I also asked them to let me know for each book whether they thought it was going to be a shelve or a scrap, just out of interest. So I have my random comment picker here. There are 198 comments on that video, so I will paste the URL in. Okay, there's 202 comments now, but I have just posted to my Patreon to remind everybody before I started this video to submit their comments. So let's see what our first book is going to be. I am so scared. I don't know if they're going to do me dirty. Is that Lindsay? It is Lindsay! Lindsay, you have done me dirty already with a shelve, but it is like a kind of anticipated read for me, and also a super recent one. Where is it though? Literally though, where is it? Oh, it's right here. So Lindsay has selected Air by Sabaa Tahir. This one was kind of an anticipated release for me last year, because I have read and really enjoyed the Ember and the Ashes series, but it's not like one of my favorite series of all time. So I was definitely intrigued to see what Sabaa Tahir produced next, but it's not like at the top of my priorities. But I do think that I'm going to enjoy this, and I do think that it is going to be a shelve. So this one, as I said, is pretty recent. It is from the October 2024 YA Fairy Loot, which is why it is a beautiful edition. And all I know is that it is a multi-perspective fantasy. I'm gonna be honest, like I've said this before, if I haven't read a book or read at least some of a book, I really struggle to get the context of like fantasy books from the synopses. It's just a load of gibberish to me. But we'll just go with the fact that it is a multi-perspective young adult fantasy story. We are following an orphan, an outcast, a prince, and a killer who will bring an empire to its knees. And when I have read a little bit more of this, I'll give you a better breakdown of the plot. This is good in terms of being one of the first books that I'm going to read this year. Like, I would anticipate rating it 4 stars. There is potential for it to be a 5, but in terms of the fact that we're bumping up the amount of books that we're reading for these videos, it's not a small one. It's 529 pages. There is something wrong with this book. I do not know what it is. I don't know what it is. I don't know what the problem is. I have made a thick juicy dent in this one. I'm 190 pages in and I don't care. I just really don't care. I'm struggling to get invested and I'm genuinely surprised. I feel like this is a me problem. I don't feel like this is a universal problem. My logical, non-emotionally engaged side of my brain says that this is good, but my heart just really isn't in it at all. There are a couple of things that I didn't know about this going in as well, actually, which I want to say it's not influencing my opinion, but maybe it is. This is directly connected to the Ember and the Ashes series, which I did not know going into it, and it's proven how little I actually remember about an Ember in the Ashes, because it'll be like, oh yeah, this character did this thing and this great battle happened between these people, and I'm like, did it? Did it? I don't remember that. But I do remember about the Ember in the Ashes series that I really enjoyed books 1 and 2, and I didn't love books 3 and 4 quite as much. This one, I would say you don't have to have read the series to read this one because it does recap you on everything that happened. But if you are intending to read An Ember in the Ashes, it does contain major spoilers for the series. So if you do want to read them both, I'd advise reading An Ember in the Ashes first. The characters in here are directly connected to the characters from An Ember in the Ashes, and some of those characters are present in here as well. So it's not like, I guess in Mistborn Era 2, the characters are a distant, like they're a part of the history and the lore of the world at that point. The characters are super present. The Ember in the Ashes characters are super present in this one. So it's like a direct continuation, because when I started, I thought that it was set in the same world, but wouldn't necessarily have much to do with the first series, but no, like they're directly connected. So this one is following 3 main perspectives. One of them is in a different place to the rest of them. 2 of them are a lot closer together and closer connected, but one of them is following a girl who is an orphan, and she is trying to kill a man who is a pilot that is responsible for setting fire to an orphanage where she lived and killing everybody apart from her and her friend. So this is a community where they're really struggling for food, so they raid other countries and other communities to gain food for themselves. So the most prestigious and important people in the society are the pilots, because they are the ones with the means to procure the food for everybody else. And the guy that she's going after is a pilot. However, he catches her in the act and then imprisons or orchestrates the imprisonment of her and all of the people from the particular sect in the society she lives in, who are essentially the people that are responsible for looking after orphans. So now all of these orphans as well are suffering because of this man, and she ends up on the run whilst also trying to stop him from becoming a more prominent member of society. We are also following the Crown Prince of the Empire, who is one of the most directly tied to the Ember in the Ashes series, and he does not want the throne. He wants to abdicate. However, he is very much feeling the pressure of what the people who came before him, like the current empress and the people before her, he's feeling the pressure of what they sacrificed for the good of their people and to be in the position that they are, which is making him feel like he has to accept this position. There are also children that have been killed in the last few months before this book, including one of his closest friends, which I think was somebody that he was also romantically interested in. And then our last perspective is a magic wielder called Saoirse, who has been exiled from her community and is a very gifted tracker. She uses the elements to help her track, and she has been not tricked, but she's been coerced into this unbreakable pact to hunt down the person who is responsible for killing the children. However, when she starts to get into it, she realizes that this is actually far more dangerous for her than she originally anticipated. So I'm assuming that at some point their paths intersect. We have already started to kind of move towards that, and the political stability of the society is also being thrown into turmoil as some of the different parties that these characters are from start to clash. Now, something that is confusing me about this is that to me this does not feel like An Ember in the Ashes. Like, obviously it's a while ago since I read it, and like I said, it's not super fresh in my mind. Like, I don't feel like I remember very much about it, but like tonally, atmospherically, the world building, aside from like one specific part of it, just doesn't feel like that series to me. And of course this is something different. This is a duology, but it's set in the same world, and not only is it set in the same world, it is kind of directly following on from the events of An Ember in the Ashes. So I expected this to feel a little bit more familiar, and I also expected to feel a little bit more connected to the characters, because I love Helene from the Ember in the Ashes series. She is my favorite, but I also, especially in the beginning, liked Leia and Elias, and at this point I'm not really connected to anybody, and I think that's the issue. Like, I feel like I'm holding this book at an arm's distance. Like, I'm reading it, I'm taking in the story, but I don't truly care about anything that has happened. Like, it's not breaking that barrier for me, and sadly that is really integral to me enjoying the story, is to feel some kind of emotional connection or investment to it. Like, I have to care, like I have to have a stake in the story, like I have to feel like it impacts me in some way, and this doesn't. If all of these characters died, I wouldn't really care at all. So I'm shocked actually, because right now if I carry on with this, it is feeling like a 3-star, and I'm honestly torn what to do about it, because what I don't want to do, and I always say this and I always end up doing it anyway, I don't want to be reading 3-star books I want to be cutting my losses. But this is like a book that a lot of people like. I checked out the average rating. It's a pretty high one. Lots and lots of 4 and 5 star reviews from my mutuals on Goodreads. So I do feel like I'm the outlier here, but I'm like, how far do I give it before I just go, this isn't working for me? Because like 190 pages, that's a lot. And normally I feel like I would have cut my losses by now. But I think because it's not bad, I'm just not enjoying it as much as I want to, is kind of what has me willing to continue a little bit. I might give it until the end of the day and see how I feel, or maybe go for like another 100 pages. I am reading this a variety of ways as well. I have the physical, which I'm dipping in and out of, but I also have the audiobook, which is full cast, but interestingly, I don't like any of the narrators for it, so I'm using it sparingly, like when I'm walking Brie or doing something where I can't pick up the physical. And I have been, like if I'm sat with Curtis and he's been playing Spider-Man, I've had my headphones on so I can listen along to the audio whilst also physically reading. Because if you remember, 2025 is my list of efficiency, so when I'm doing something, I want to be doing it with my whole chest. No more getting distracted and wandering thoughts and scrolling instead of reading. Like I want to be locked in and loaded when I'm doing a task. So the audiobook has definitely helped me keep on track for that as well. But yeah, this is not going the way I anticipated. So we'll see how it pans out over the rest of the day, but I'm scared. I am feeling super fragile today. The adjustment into 2025 and getting back into a routine has been violent. And I also had the most brutal teeth cleaning of my life this morning, and I feel like it's just sucked all of the energy out of me. So if you see my soul leaving my body in this clip, then I apologize. I will be back to normal energy levels soon. But I have read some more of Air by Shelve It. I read another 52 pages since I checked in with you, so I'm on page 242, and I am about 20 pages away from the halfway mark of this book, and I am sad to say that it is going to be a DNF. I am shocked, I'm gooped, I'm gagged, I'm disappointed. I did not see this coming. I thought that this was a 100% easy win, easy shelve, and it's not. It's none of those things. I'm gonna go get the actual dust jacket of this actually, so that I don't have to keep holding it sideways, so that you can somewhat identify it by the pages. I am also genuinely devastated that I didn't like this book, because I would have loved to have kept this edition on my shelves forever. This is so pretty, but alas, it is not to be. I can only really compare this to Realmbreaker by Victoria Aveyard, and the comparison there is that they are both multi-perspective young adult high fantasies following a cast of characters that are thrown together to achieve a similar goal. The other comparison that I make between the two, the reason why I compare this to Realmbreaker specifically, because there's tons of like young adult multi-perspective fantasy out there, is because that book was also such a drag from an author who I had previously loved. So the Red Queen series by Victoria Aveyard, one of my favorite series. Can't say that about An Ember in the Ashes, but I love the first 2 books, and the last 2 were like okay, like I enjoyed them, and this was just so boring. Like I'm so bored, and maybe it gets better at the end, maybe it does, but I'm at this point disinterested where I don't want to pick it up. When I'm reading it, like I feel my mind wandering. I'd rather be doing something else, and that is the energy that I don't want to bring into 2025. I keep saying like I want to read better books, like I want to cut my losses when a book isn't delivering, because realistically the most important currency we have in life is time. And do I want to spend my time reading a book that is probably going to be a 3, maybe a 4 at a push? But even if I was interested in the sequel, it wouldn't be a sequel that I prioritized, because I would always remember how much of a drag like the first half of this book is. And whenever it comes to a DNF like this, I always throw it back to Red Rising, where I almost DNF'd up to like halfway through, and then in the second half I ended up enjoying it, and then the series has become like my favorite series of all time. So I don't want to be too hasty with DNFing, but with this, I think, considering I didn't love the second 2 books in the Ember in the Ashes series, and this one isn't holding my interest, I'm finding it very boring, and I really just don't care about anything that's happening, I think that for me, it's just best to put this one down and move on. Also, this would be the first book that I finish for 2025, and I don't know if I want that energy in my life, but I am very disappointed. I will say that I really like Sabatier's writing style, and that is consistent through this. I think that it is well written. I just don't care about anything that's actually happening, and that is probably a me problem. So it's time to discover how my patrons are going to hurt me today. So since I put a little bit of a reminder in Discord, we have had a few more comments. There's now 225 comments on the video, and let's see what's up next. Okay, so this one is Lexi Oh, and it is Part of Your World, which I think is Abby Jimenez. It's right at the bottom down here. So I have not looked at any of the comments on this video. I have glanced a few when I've been going on to get the link for the comment generator and stuff. But generally, because I put it on my second account that I just use for like private unlisted Patreon videos, it was great because I wasn't getting any notifications for comments. So everything is a surprise. Like I haven't really read what anybody has said about any particular books. I don't know how many books are really popular and lots of people have recommended them. But I have glimpsed a couple of people recommending that I pick up A Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. So I don't think Lexi specified whether they think that this is a shelve or a scrap for me. No, but Lexi did say that they love it. And I have seen at least one other person predict that this would be a shelve. And I also am going to lean that way just because of how much I know everybody loves Abby Jimenez. This one I think is a little bit of an age gap romance. I will check, but I'm pretty sure it has a woman who is slightly older, has more responsibilities than the male character, and it is about how they are kind of making their relationship work or dealing with this attraction that they have when their lives are so different and the compromises that they have to make to be able to build a life together. The male main character Daniel is 10 years younger than our female main character Alexis, and they're also from very different backgrounds. Alexis is very rich, she comes from a family of very well-known surgeons, and Daniel is a carpenter from a small town, but I think that she is not quite as ambitious as her family are or as her family want her to be, and she is more inclined to want like a little bit of a slower, quieter life that this man can provide for her, but it's about making those two different worlds that they come from mesh. Based on what it says on the tin, like the synopsis of this, I would not predict that I would love it based on the romances that I tend to love, but just with how well loved Abby Jimenez is, I have a good feeling about this. And I have to be honest, I'm really happy to be reading a contemporary romance because I don't think I'm super in the mood for fantasy right now, and I am also reading a fantasy book, like an adult epic fantasy book in the background of this, but it's nice to have a little bit of a change of pace, so thank you very much, Lexi. I am nursing a much needed cup of coffee right now. I have Patreon sprints that are starting in about 35 minutes where I'm actually hoping to finish Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. I still have a ways to go. I should have finished this yesterday if I'm being honest, and I did want to update you yesterday morning, but we ended up rearranging the entire living room on a whim, which took up most of my day. Just realized as well I don't know what page I'm up to because my bookmark fell out and I haven't put it back in. I think I'm somewhere around page 240, 250. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm on page 232, and I am really enjoying this book. I'm so happy to say it as well. Like with this challenge, I do always hope for at least a decent amount of scraps because that helps me clear through things a little bit more efficiently, but it's also really nice to pick up a book and like genuinely enjoy it for once as well, which I am with A Part of Your World. So this one is following a woman called Alexis who is from a family of surgeons, and she is coming out of a psychologically and emotionally abusive relationship where everybody around her wants her to get back with this guy because of the level of prestige that he offers her family, because in the eyes of her family she lacks ambition because she doesn't want to be a surgeon like everybody else. She is, I think she's like an ER doctor, she works in the emergency room and she likes being hands-on, saving lives. She finds the thought of standing for hours in surgery really boring, but this isn't good enough for her family, and the guy that she was with, who she's just getting out of a relationship with, is really high up in this hospital, and so dating him essentially in the eyes of her family made up for the fact that she wasn't interested in climbing the ladder to be this top surgeon. Now she also has a twin brother who does have that ambition. However, at the beginning of this book, in like the first 2 chapters, he comes to see her. It's been a while since they've seen each other because he has been away in Africa helping in the medical field over there, and he comes and tells her that he's fallen in love, he's moving to Africa, and she's just gonna have to deal with their parents herself. So this puts her in a position where she now, to be accepted by her family, has to rise through the ranks at this hospital, which she has no drive to do, and she's really fighting against this. She doesn't want to do it, but she doesn't really see a way out for herself. Now our main male character Daniel is 10 years younger than Alexis, and he lives in this town in the middle of nowhere. There's no hospital. I think they have, yeah, they do have a grocery store, but they don't have like a doctor's surgery. Like in the off season, because it's a touristy place, they have to drive like 45 minutes to go to a restaurant if they want to, because nothing's really open. And he is a carpenter, but he also has a old mansion that has been in his family for generations. His great grandfather was the person who built it, and he is running that as a B&B because he can't afford to live in a mansion, but because of the passion of like his family put in generations of work into this house and being generations of carpenters, he very much wants to keep it in the family, even though it's something that he has to run as a business as opposed to being able to live there. So Alexis is coming home from a funeral when she stops in Daniel's town, and she's not a one night stand kind of person, but she stops at the bar on her way through. She meets Daniel. She asks him if there's anywhere to eat in town, and he's like, no honey, nothing's open. So he's like, okay, I promise I'm not a murderer. You can come home with me and I'll make you something to eat. They end up sleeping together and very quickly become infatuated with each other. However, Alexis knows that this is not going to work because her parents would hate him, and not even in a subtle way, like they would outright be horrible to him to his face. Her friends are all rich, judgmental people who also wouldn't accept him. He lives in this town that he's never going to move from because it means a lot to him. She has to work at this hospital for her entire life because her entire family has worked at this hospital, and it's just never going to work. But despite all of that, these two just cannot keep away from each other. Their chemistry is amazing, their sex is great, and they're also bonding on a deeper level in a way that Alexis especially has never experienced, coming from this world of prestige where everything really centers on appearances as opposed to having any real depth. But she is especially trying to come to terms with the fact that this relationship is just never going to work because there's no feasible way for it to become an actual realistic part of her life. So this is a little bit different to the typical romances that I enjoy because it starts immediately. Like this one night stand is in like the first 1 or 2 chapters, and they keep coming back to each other obviously throughout the course of this book, and we do have the tension of the fact that it can never be a real relationship, but when they're together everything is sunshine and roses. And typically I enjoy books that are a little bit more enemies to lovers or hate to love, have a little bit more banter and some animosity, even when it's just like playful flirtatious animosity of like, oh, I'm never gonna be with you honey, I would never, when really like we know that they're desperate to be together. So it's a lot more, I don't want to say wholesome in that way, but it's a lot more cut and dry, I want to say, than the typical romance that I enjoy. But I just find something about their relationship so enamoring that I'm having an amazing time with this. I'm really sucked into it. I think that it's funny. I enjoy the moments when they're together, but then also in terms of Alexis's life where she's dealing with this abusive ex-partner that will not leave her alone, and an unsupportive family that don't even support her decision to break up with him, even though he was a terrible person to her. The straw that broke the camel's back was that he cheated on her, but there's layers and layers and layers of other stuff that was going on there that nobody really gives much of a shit about. And I love the contemporary elements of it, the storylines going on in their own lives, especially actually because Daniel has a horrible parent, a parent that is all too familiar to me, and it actually, in the portions where he is interacting with that parent, it actually hurt me to read because I get it, like I get it, and it's sad, and I'm relating to it kind of on that level, but I'm invested in their personal lives. I haven't read many small town romances. I don't know if this would count because it has the big city element as well as the small town element. I mean, if it does, I'm enjoying it, and it's the first small town romance I've also enjoyed. So yeah, everything's good. I think that this would be a shelve. It's difficult to say with romances because sometimes, like with the Christmas romances I read for the last episode, one of those especially I gave 4 stars. I was like, this is a great Christmas romance. I don't really care about Christmas romances and I'm never going to read it again, so I unhauled it. So it depends like kind of the level of attachment I have to the characters, whether this is going to be a shelve, because it could be a thing of like, oh, I'm really glad that I read this but I don't need to keep it, or it could be one that I maybe want to revisit in the future, or a pairing that really resonates with me, so I want to keep this on my shelves. The filming location that I've chosen should maybe give you a little bit of a hint of what my plans are for Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez, which I have just finished and I thoroughly enjoyed. I gave this one a very high 4-star rating. The only reason why it wasn't 5 is that it just didn't feel like a 5-star. That is literally the only reason. For me, 5 stars are a feeling. On paper, I would say that this is pretty much like the perfect romance. It just didn't quite feel like a 5-star. Literally the only criticism that I could give it, the only thing that I could say that I didn't like about it, is the location of the end of the book. Like we all know all romances have third act breakups. This one had one of the best third act breakups that I've ever read. Probably The Hating Game is the best at everything in my opinion, but then also I really like the third act breakup for Love on the Brain by Ali Hazelwood, because Ali Hazelwood's heroes always deliver amazing monologues, and then probably part of your world. Like the level of heartbreak that I felt on behalf of these characters, unparalleled, and I thought that that was really, really well done. Something that I also really loved about this book is the portrayal of abuse and how therapy positive it was, the representation of generational abuse, the way that we had lots of different types of abusive men, and not just men, actually also abusive parents in general throughout this. Because like I said earlier, something that really resonated with me was the way that Daniel's mother treated him and the situation that was kind of going on with her. And I guess I could very lightly criticize this book, and that I think it didn't quite go enough into her. Like, it focused a lot more on Alexis and the situation that she was in, also with a terrible family, in a very different way. And I would have liked it if it would have swayed over to Daniel a little bit and gone into his relationship with his mother in a little bit more depth. Abby Jimenez is a very popular romance author at the minute as well. I would say that she's quite hyped and up there with authors like Emily Henry. And something that I really liked about this is that we had an older female main character, and this is the first book in a series. I personally categorize romances like this as standalones because they don't have to be read in order. They're all standalone romances. But the second book in this series does follow Alexis's best friend, who is recently divorced, and following like a divorced woman is something that we do see. But I think in like the most hyped and the most popular romantic fiction, we tend to be following younger main characters just in general, and that is actually across all genres. So I do like to read about characters that are a little bit older and with a little bit more life experience. I think that I really loved that this was a different type of romance to me. Like I said from the very beginning, these two characters are just pulled to each other. There is a gravitational pull that keeps bringing them back to each other, which is a little bit different than the kind of romances that I tend to read. There tends to be more of a slow burn in terms of relationship development, where this was more like these characters are inevitable, but every single thing in their lives is just getting in their way. And how can you make this work when the obstacles seem insurmountable? So I liked that this kind of gave me a little bit of experience of a different type of romance that I don't typically reach for, and I will definitely be looking out for Abby Jimenez books in the future. Now, I am not in the market for any new books. I did notice that they have the sequel to this, which is the one following Brie, in my library. However, I'm on a little bit of a library ban at the minute as well, so we'll see if I pick up the sequel in the future or not. I am sure at some point in my life Abby Jimenez will cross my path again, and I would be happy to read another book from her, especially because if we talk about the court of public opinion, this is not a one-hit wonder from Abby Jimenez. She's very well regarded, and I would be happy to read more books from her in the future. I would like to keep this book, and I do intend to shelve it. That is why we're up here on the landing where my romance shelves are. I kind of wish I didn't have it in hardback though. It is a book of the month book from when I was working with Book of the Month a couple of years ago, which is why I have it. I am going to shelve it, but it's just typically it's not the kind of book that I would have bought for myself, gone out and bought for myself in hardback, and it's also going to make it a little bit trickier to shelve. I'm running out of space up there, guys. Let's go investigate. This is probably the best view we've ever had of my romance shelves, but I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of what's going on, because as you can see, they're leaning. Is this safe? Absolutely not. And if you remember in the last episode, I nearly died here. Ow! I nearly died here. So I'm thinking because they're leaning, there might be a gap there. However, is the gap big enough for part of your world? I don't think it is, but we are going to try, because in terms of things I haven't read on this shelf, the options not looking so great. So Abby Jimenez would go here. So I would have to straighten these guys up a little bit. It's because when all of the books fell last time, the bookend bent, so it's kind of pushing them in a little bit. I'm scared. This book is pretty much not even on the shelf. It's literally just floating into an abyss. But these guys are heavier. Oh no. I can also, like, I could take that off the shelf. That one would fit into one of these cubbies if it had to. If this wasn't so bent, it would be a little bit more secure. I feel like I just made that worse. I don't know how that was worse. Ideally, what I want to do in the long run is take Fourth Wing and Iron Flame off here and put them on my regular fantasy shelves, or one of my blocks of regular fantasy shelves. So I just don't feel like, given what else I have, that it makes sense for those to be up there anymore. They should be with the rest of the fantasy, even though they are, I would say, more romantic leaning than, like, they're more romantasy than fantasy romance, if you are going to distinguish between the two genres, which I typically do not. So in that regard, they shouldn't be here. But I don't want to do that right now, because if I were to do that, I would have to fill the gaps from here with books from the stacks and then swap out the books in the stacks for books from the shelves, but that's kind of against the rules. The only book that I can read off here that I would even consider as a scrap, I mean, I might read Iron Flame and hate it, but I don't really want to dive into that right now. The Undermining of Twyla and Frank, I haven't read that. I'm fully expecting to love it though, because I love The Undertaking of Heart and Mercy, one of my best books of the year, which you will have just seen. So the only thing that I haven't read is Heartbones by Colleen Hoover. Let me get it down. If they were on there properly though, would they lean a little bit less? No. Colleen Hoover is a hit or miss author with me, because there are some Colleen Hoover books that I love. I love the drama. We've been through this. I love the angst. I love the toxicity. And some of them are like that in a really compelling way. I also genuinely really like It Ends With Us. And I'm not going to take arguments in the comments, okay? Like, I've been through it 100 times. It's fine. Save yourself. Save your breath. Save mine. It's good. But there are books by Colleen Hoover that I really don't like. And actually, there's one here that I should probably unhaul, because I really did not like Layla by Colleen Hoover. However, I love, as I mentioned, It Ends With Us. I also love All Your Perfects. The drama of November 9, unparalleled. However, there's a bunch that I don't love, like Ugly Love I have here. That was fine. I feel like I should just unhaul some stuff. No, don't do it. There's like the YA one. I read one. I can't remember what it was called. It should be in here, shouldn't it? I read the Slammed series. I mean, that was fine. I read the Maybe Someday series. The first one was good, but I didn't like the second two. I feel like her series, like all of the sequels, are unnecessary. And I've also read Confess, which I feel, oh no, I do have Confess. I liked Confess. Without Merit, unhauled. Heartbones is this one. And then I didn't like Layla, loved Verity, and then I have like a few that I haven't read. So it could go either way, and because they're all standalones, like I'm happy to keep the ones that I love and unhaul the ones that I don't. It's just there's no indication really of which way they're gonna go. This one is about a girl who gets a full scholarship to Penn State. However, there's an unexpected death in the family that leaves her homeless, so she has to spend the remainder of her summer with her father, who is estranged from her, and she has like a summer romance with the boy who lives next door, who's like this wealthy brooding guy, and I'm assuming it turns into a happily ever after for them. So this is an option. However, I'm going to explore what would happen if I decided to put The Hating Game on a shelf down below. I just want to reread this book. Is that an option? Down here, The Hating Game paperback is right here. I mean, I could read this and find out, because it is a paranormal romance, but it's one that I have been led to believe that I may enjoy more than the Side Changeling series, which I tried. So I could try that, and that would mean that I could unhaul 4 books potentially. My other option is The Donut Trap by Julie 2, which I'm kind of tempted by. More because I want to read it though, not that I think it's going to be a scrap at all. And that one's about the same length as Heartbones. And then this would fit right here. I have just thought of a third option though. I'm wondering if there is a world in which unhauling Layla by Colleen Hoover, which as we've just established is a book that I've read and I actively disliked. I'm wondering if there is any world in which unhauling that book will allow me to get this back on the shelves and mean that I don't have to read anything because I brought The Hating Game down already. So let's explore that third option. Okay, so removing Layla. Remember as well that the alphabetization down here is like loose. It's not serious. That doesn't fit. See, this is the problem. That also doesn't fit. Oh, I just really don't want to though. Could put Twisted Love there. Oh, I can just about fit King of Wrath there. I have to leave a gap on this shelf because Bride by Ellie Hazelwood is on my current TBR, but I could move one book over. No, not Bride. Check and Mate. Bride's right there. And then I could replace this one with these ones. This is where it gets tricky. I would generally just love to swap these guys around. Oh, but that doesn't fit. See, that's the problem there. Nope. Oh. Didn't I just literally take that out of there? It would fit there. There we go. But that just feels like too much outside of alphabetization. Oh, what about, because this is E.J. Mello. The problem is having more than one book by the same author and trying to keep them at least somewhat together. It's like, haha, McIntyre, which actually goes before Mello. I just realized that during that I didn't tip my camera down, so you didn't see what I just did, but I did indeed manage to get The Donut Trap back on the shelf, which means that we can now slide Colleen Hoover back up here. And the book that I'll be unhauling is Layla, which this is the story of a guy who meets like the girl of his dreams. I'm pretty sure they get married or something, and he takes her to the place where they met and fell in love because she has some sort of accident and loses all of her memory. And I'm pretty sure that he thinks that she's being haunted, or the B&B is being haunted. I hated the twist in this. I was like, blew my mind. And most of Colleen Hoover's twists are not great, but some are very entertaining. This one just did not hit with me at all. So I'm going to be unhauling this one, and we will be going to the stacks to find out what our third book of this vlog is going to be. So I can't remember what we were on last time, so I'm not sure if any comments have been added, but we're on 225, and I have reduced the amount of time that it like cycles through names for because 5 seconds was just a little bit too long. I feel like this pick might make me kick myself for not just reading Heartbones, but let's find out what book 3 will be. Please. I should have got rid of the ad. Oh my god, it won't go away. There we go. Oh, okay. Okay, damn. So this one is Liana's pick, and it is A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. And I'll be honest, I wasn't thrilled when this came up. I have no reason to think that I'm going to dislike Ava Reid's books necessarily. However, there are some people whose internet personalities just do not mesh with my general life personality, and I'm sad to say that Ava Reid is one of those for me. So I have not been particularly enthusiastic to pick up one of Ava Reid's books. However, that does not mean that I won't enjoy them. And I actually have 2 copies of this. One is upstairs on the shelves because I'm not sure why I got it in the GSFF. I don't know whether it was before I was skipping or whether I've run out of skips or something. And it could have been before I was checking what the upcoming subscription box books I was going to get were, and I didn't maybe know that it was the Illumicrate book of the month. This one is from September 2023, so wow, longer ago than I thought. I ended up with 2 copies, and I had no desire to have 2 copies, but here we are. So this one I think is dark academia, and it is potentially going to be a little bit too pretentious for me. I wouldn't be mad if it was, and I DNF'd it, but I am going to go into it with an open mind. My resistance to reading this is kind of similar to my resistance to reading Babel. I was like, there's no way I'm gonna love this, and I ended up really enjoying Babel. So maybe I'll also really enjoy A Study in Drowning. It does sound good though, kind of. So this one is about a girl who believes in fairy tales. Since childhood, apparently she's been haunted by the visions of the Fairy King, and she loves a book called Angarad, which is by an author called Emrys Murden, which is an epic about a morsel girl who falls in love with the Fairy King and then destroys him. So as a scholar, when she is in architecture college, she hears of a contest from the author's family to redesign the house, which I feel like is such an obscure entry point into this novel. So she goes to this place, and while she's there, she finds a stodgy young literature scholar who is also studying the papers and is determined to prove that this guy is a fraud. It gives the impression that the house is going to be an entity in this story, and also I'm assuming that there is going to be some sort of Fairy King in here as well. So we'll see. All I can do is try it. I'm going in with an open mind. I would be happy to DNF this on haul both copies that I have, if I'm being honest. But while it's here, we might as well give it a try, and it might surprise me like Babel did. Just setting up my computer to get a little bit of editing done this morning. Apologies for my croakiness. I haven't had my coffee yet. I've only just made it. I've had a rough start to my day, to be honest. But I have read a little bit of A Study in Drowning, and at this point I'm not entirely sure whether I'm enjoying this or not. I don't like elements of it, but also when I'm reading it, I find that I'm getting quite quickly absorbed. So I'm currently 92 pages into it. It does have quite long chapters, so that is only up to chapter 6. And this is following a girl called Effie who has gone to university to study architecture. However, that's not actually what she wanted to study, but women are not allowed to study literature, which was her top choice, because she is obsessed with an author of fairy tales called... I have listened to a couple of chapters in the audiobook, book, and I don't feel like the narrator for that, she has quite a gravelly voice, and I don't feel like it's the best for getting pronunciations because of the tone of her voice, but I think it's pronounced something like Meridian. One day a notice goes up on the poster board at college about a competition to design this man's house, and she obviously jumps at the chance. It is the greatest opportunity that she can have to see kind of like where he lived, have a hand in his legacy. He has died at this point, and she enters the competition, she wins, and she ends up going to this like crumbling seaside estate where she finds a literature student there who is collecting things like the author's letters and manuscripts and trying to put together like a life story, because he has only died recently, so it's kind of at a point where this author's life story is something that is highly sought after, and a lot of people are racing to kind of be the first person to do it. Content warnings, because there is a very present, heavily implied sexual assault story running alongside this as well, with our main character and one of the professors at the university. At this point, I am not sure entirely how that's going to play into the story, because she's not currently at the university, and I don't expect her to be for the majority of this book, but it is something that is referred back to constantly. So while nothing graphic has happened on page as of yet, it is still a very big part of this story. I like the atmosphere of this. I didn't actually know going into it that this is young adult, and it is Ava Reid's only young adult book. It's a lot easier to read than I expected it to be. I thought that the prose would be a lot more dense and a lot more flowery than it is, but I do like the atmosphere that is created, especially by this seaside town. Like, one of the main issues that Effie encounters when she arrives at this house is that it is entirely waterlogged because the house is sinking into the sea, and she finds out that this is kind of like why nobody wanted to do this, why it's a project that's been offered to a student, because it is completely impossible. And I like that sleepy, folkloric, abandoned seaside village theme, especially because I have lived in areas like this, not quite as like eerie but you know, like forgotten seaside towns where in tourist season like there's a bit of buzz, but aside from that it is entirely dead. However, there are a lot of things about this that I don't quite love. I don't love our main character. I find her to be quite dramatic, and she has a lot of things going on that have contributed to this kind of hopeless attitude that she has, but there's just things like she goes to the library and she wants to check out a bunch of books on this author, like his life story, and she finds out that somebody else has already checked them out. So she cries about it because somebody else had the audacity to be at the library before her to check out a selection of books that she also wanted. The fantasy elements in here, in terms of the type of story this is going to be, does not fall into something that I particularly enjoy. It does center around fairy tales, specifically the fairy tale of the Fairy King that Meridian wrote that is outlined throughout this book, and I feel like one of the main fantastical elements is that this isn't a fairy tale, it's something that actually happened, or something that he's seen around his home in this place that he wrote down and span into a story. That is typically like, it's not my favorite kind of fantasy. It reminds me, obviously, like we're talking about fairy tales here, I have discovered in recent years that if I read something that contains fairy tales or is a retelling, then sometimes I enjoy it. But if we're talking about folkloric creatures in the way that they're traditionally portrayed as like being kind of scary and tricksters, I just don't really like it very much. And as well as that, this is reminding me a little bit of Divine Rivals in that it's set in a high fantasy world, but there's no reason for it to be a high fantasy world because it is very reminiscent of our world. It feels a little bit historical, but I can't place a time period, so I feel like part of the reason it isn't a fantasy world is so that Ava Reid can take liberties with things like the world, and it doesn't have to mirror our world or be set in an exact time period. But I also don't see the point in it being high fantasy, if that makes sense. It feels to me like it's set in maybe like the 1950s, I want to say, in atmosphere. We have references to things like telephones in here, so they have some level of technology. And actually, one of the things that I generally cannot fathom in here, because this is in a high fantasy world, is that the love interest smokes cigarettes. And why in the year of 2022, I think this was published, 2023, would you make a fantasy world and put regular cigarettes in it? I don't understand. understand, because like you could just have a world that didn't have cigarettes. I understand the place of cigarettes in terms of creating an image, especially when we're talking about contemporary fiction, but if you're going out of your way to create a whole fantasy world, why have such a mundane object as a cigarette? Well, that's what I mean when I'm like, it feels like there's no reason for it to be high fantasy, but we'll see as it goes on, because as well, like with Divine Rivals, because to me Divine Rivals is a World War I romance that is on the backdrop of a fantastical war that isn't actually relevant for the first book. Like, it feels weird, it doesn't feel natural for it to be in a fantasy world, and that is kind of how it's feeling here. Like, I don't understand the magic that we currently have present in this world, and I don't understand why the other magic, like the folkloric creatures, are anything different, especially when we have so many references to mundane objects and mundane things that we have in current society. So we'll see how it goes. I feel like because I am enjoying my time reading it, but there's so many things that are jarring me about it, that if I do decide to continue on with this, it is going to be a 3-star, and that is typically what I'm trying to avoid. But we'll see throughout the next chunk that I read whether my feelings change at all. I'm now 304 pages into A Study in Drowning, so not very far from the end. So you could say that I'm enjoying this one quite a bit, and I'm definitely not going to be DNFing it. There are things that I really love about this one, but there's still things that I'm not really into. But the thing that I am enjoying the most by far is the atmosphere. It is so eerie and haunting, and there's just this really foreboding aura that like lingers around the entire story that I am eating up. It's reminded me a lot of like Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, which is a book that I ended up not really liking very much. One, because of the horror element that came into it like towards the end, but also it just wasn't as creepy as I expected it to be, and I feel like this is really given that eerie creepy factor that I really wanted from Mexican Gothic and that I was not expecting from this. I now understand why abuse plays such a large part in this story as well, because it is mainly kind of mirroring the story of this fairy king, like the fairy tale that this author wrote, and that has themes like it's about the fairy king that like kidnapped his bride, and she grows to love him eventually, but also kind of grows in her own self-worth and her own strength to eventually conquer him. So the story is kind of like following those themes, and as they're delving more into the author and the author's life and personality, they're questioning why and how he came to write this fairy tale, and also potentially the parallels between his own life and the fairy tale that he wrote. The house that they are in is blowing my mind a little bit. Like, is such a presence in this novel. It is my favorite part because of just the atmosphere that it creates, because it is waterlogged. Like, they have breakfast at this dining table and there is water running from the ceiling, and part of me is just confused and has always been confused. I'm still confused about why this is a high fantasy, because it still doesn't feel like it's necessary with how like mundane and contemporary it is. I don't understand why Ava Reid chose to set it on a high fantasy backdrop as opposed to just like setting it in our world in an ambiguous time period, but it shouldn't be standing. It's damp, there's water running down the walls. I just don't understand how people are living in this house, and the thought of going in this house actually makes me feel a little bit sick. And I think that that really lends to the tone of the novel and the way that you're supposed to feel, because the main character is also very uncomfortable by this house, and I think just the fact that it is like seeping water adds an extra layer of eeriness to this story. I am a little bit confused though as well why this has been published as young adult, because Ava Reid typically writes adult novels and I haven't read any of her other stuff, so I don't know how it differs from this. As for the characters' ages, they're in college, so they're like 18 at the absolute youngest, and also the topics and the themes that are discussed in here, like that are the center point of this novel, are quite dark. And I'm not saying that young adults can't read things that have dark themes, that they can't understand it, or it's too like adult for them, but knowing that Ava Reid does also write adult novels, and the fact that I've read adult books that are a lot less adult in theme, nature and tone than this, I am a little bit confused as to why this has been put into young adult. And I also think that it would be better marketed as a horror, because I feel like that is its strength. Like, the fantasy to me still not really making sense, and it's an element of this book that I actually don't really care about at all, but the creepiness of it, the mystery that these characters are exploring of like who the author actually was and how he came to write this fairy tale, that I am so interested in. And I think that if this book was actually published as a horror, as if it had been intentionally going down that route. It could have also taken things a little step further, which would have been great, because we also have, like, our main character has hallucinations, and we have a ghost in here as well. There's the creepy man that lives in the house. There's the author's widow who lives in the house that nobody has ever seen. They don't know who she is. They've never heard her. And I am just so intrigued. So that is what's pulling me through this book. The fact, like, I think I know what the reveal is going to be, like the answer to this mystery, but I don't know how we're going to get there, and I am enjoying, like, exploring all of these different plot threads. So I'm definitely enjoying this way more than I thought I was going to, which is great. There is a sequel to this, which is coming out in August, so I'm interested to see how this is going to wrap up, because I don't want to leave this mystery unsolved. Like, I want this thing that they're looking into in this book to be wrapped up. But then if it is wrapped up, I do feel like I'm going to be less inclined to pick up the sequel, because I do prefer series that kind of just follow one storyline as opposed to having like a more isolated story with little connectors per book. Here's the tea. I have finished A Study in Drowning. And I know the last time that I spoke to you guys about this, I was giving it a glowing review. I was telling you how much I loved it, how much of a good time I was having, how much it was exceeding all of my expectations. And now that I finished it, I swear I've read like 3 chapters. Now that I finished it, I do feel a little bit differently. And honestly, this is the worst kind of book. Not in terms of like the book as a book, but in terms of me as a reader, this is the worst kind of book for me, because I loved parts of this. Like, parts of this were 5 stars and parts of this were 2 stars, and so I have very, very mixed feelings, and I hate it. This is the same thing that happened with the Naomi Novik Magic School series, the Scholarman series, where there were things that I loved and things that I hated. So overall it gets like a middling rating, but I never really know how I feel about it, because the atmosphere in here, as you can tell from everything I've already said, was unparalleled. It was eerie, it was haunting, it alluded to, well, it didn't allude to, like, the main theme of this book is male violence against women, and the way that that was portrayed throughout the metaphor, throughout the atmosphere that was created in this book, was masterful. However, I thought that the characters were really bland. I do not care about them as characters. There are some books where I really need to connect to the characters to be able to enjoy the story and enjoy the plot, and there are some books, like I feel this should be, where it is more about the story than it is about the characters, and like in thrillers, I guess, characters are just vehicles through which the story is told, and I feel like that is what this was for me. But obviously it does have a sequel, and I looked at the synopsis. It's a continuation of the story, but the core plot that they're exploring in here is wrapped up, but it's more of like an extension of their characters because of what happened in here, from what I can gather. And the issue is that I just really don't care about them, and I really did not care about the romance in this book. Considering that the strongest theme in this book is male violence against women, I don't feel like there should have been a romance, especially because I feel like there was very little nuance in the depiction of men in here. Like, there are quite a few male characters in here. Every single one of them is a sleaze, apart from, conveniently, the love interest. Now that I know that there is a sequel, and I know what the sequel is about, I feel like that is going to be explored with a little bit more nuance. But in terms of this book, there are sleazy, creepy men, and there is the love interest. And I feel like, considering how present the themes of abuse and like sexual abuse were in this book, there should have been more discussion or internal monologue from the main character regarding men in general, I want to say, or we should have had more portrayals of men that weren't sleazy and creepy, aside from this like one magic perfect prince who was literally like boring as fuck. I do also think that this should not have been a fantasy, and I feel like it would have been so much more impactful if it wasn't a fantasy. I still think that you could have kept everything about this pretty much the same. You could have set it in the real world, which, as I've said, I don't feel like there's much significance to it being set in a fantasy world, and everything else could have been the same. Like, we could have still been going to explore the home of this author of fairy tales. The main character could still have been a big fan, and then when she gets there and like dives into his life a little bit more, she starts to uncover things about him that she maybe didn't want to know. And instead of it being a real fantastical presence, it could be a metaphorical fantastical presence that really underpins the themes of this book. And I actually feel like having this be a fantasy book did it a disservice a little bit. So the whole middle portion of this I loved, and when I started it I was like, oh, I don't know, this seems fine. I don't love it. And then we got to the house and I was obsessed. And every time I was picking it up, I wasn't thinking about it a lot when I didn't have it in my hands. But when I was picking it up, I was thankful that this had long chapters because it meant that I was sinking into it for like 25 minutes, 30 minutes at a time, when usually I'm a short chapter queen. And I did not want to stop reading to go to sleep. And then we got to the part where they leave the house at the end of the book. And I'm like, I don't care. Like the last 2 chapters, I was on board. I don't care anymore. And as well as that, something in terms of like a narrative point of view, instead of, I don't know, revealing things a little bit more subtly, there is like just this whole portion at the end where everything's info dumped of like everything that happened, instead of like you just kind of piecing it together yourself and being like, oh, so this is why this happened. I do think that the answer to the mystery was a little bit predictable. Like I knew what it was from pretty early on, but I still got swept away in the mystery of it and them exploring like these different threads that they were going down. So I don't feel like that killed the suspense or anything. I just feel like the whole info dump at the end was doubly annoying because I didn't feel like the mystery was that hard to solve. What do we do then? Do we shelve or do we scrap? We could do either. At this point, I can't even tell you if I am going to pick up the sequel. It is released in August, so I have a few months to think about it. So I think I'm just going to do that. I'm just going to see how I feel by the time like the special edition or whatever of the sequel is announced and see how I feel about it, because realistically, I loved the portion of this set at the house. And if the sequel isn't set at the house, which I'm pretty sure it's not going to be, am I going to enjoy it? I don't know. But the last line of this was also really good, actually leading into the theme of the sequel. So purely because this is a low risk decision, I am going to choose to shelve this one because I have a duplicate copy upstairs on my shelves, which means that I don't have to unhaul anything. I have to unhaul a copy of this book. So I'm gonna go upstairs and look at the other one. The other one I've got is a Goldsboro edition, and see which one it is that I want to keep. But we're not gonna have to do anything with the shelves to be able to shelve this, because it is literally just gonna be swapping one out for another one. I know that I keep saying this, but tomorrow is actually the day that I'm going to properly empty out and clean out this room and get everything back to the places where it should be, instead of it being just a dumping ground in here. And then hopefully I can't even like close the door at this point because there's now a washing basket in here and I don't know why. But I have decided that I don't want to keep this on these shelves because literally aside from A Study in Drowning, they are all tall hardbacks up here. See, I brought a couple of short hardbacks with me, but actually that was quite a narrow space, so I don't know if they're gonna fit. I'm also going to take the other Ava Reid book I own downstairs and put it with where I'm going to be shelving this one. So here are the 2 editions. This one is the Illumicrate, this one is the Goldsboro. Now it seems that I decided originally that it was this one that I wanted to keep in pristine condition, and this is the one that I was going to be using as my reading copy, and now it has indeed been my reading copy. I think this one has more customizations. It has a really nice printed hardcover, which I do love printed hardcovers, as well as quite a nice sprayed edge. I don't love the colour of the cover, but I think in terms of the book, like the atmosphere of the book, the colour choice is really good on this one. Whereas this one feels a little bit bland, like it literally just feels like any random book that doesn't have a dust jacket on. It does have a quote across the edges though, which says the only enemy is the sea, which having read it is super relevant. The end pages I think are the normal ones in a different colorway, and it is the signed and numbered one, so it's number 1538 out of 2000. I think out of the 2 of these, I am gonna keep the Illumicrate and I'm gonna unhaul the Goldsboro. So in its place, this isn't in alphabetical order because like I said, I only have one small hardback in here and it's this one spot. So yeah, see, that's too tight. So I'm gonna have to, I can't even take you over there. I'm just gonna have to grab a book. I'm out of breath because I had to run up and downstairs because one of the books that I brought up was way too big. But I've got Year of the Reaper by Micaiah Lucifer, which I pulled from the little shelf down there to go in that slot. And then I have this edition of The Study in Drowning, which is hitting the scrap pile. And then I have this and The Wolf and the Woodsman, which are going to be downstairs on the shelf in front of the window. So this one needs to go to the bottom. That's just a random old gig ticket, don't mind that. Defiance by CJ Redwine, and then The Wolf and the Woodsman and A Study in Drowning. They look good there, actually. That was a good choice. So we're now halfway through this video, and so far so good. Definitely more shelves so far than I feel like would usually have, but I did feel like that was going to be a thing when I'm using books that people recommend, because I feel like people are just more inclined to recommend things that they want me to read or think I'm going to enjoy than things that they think I'm going to unhaul. But let's see what our fourth book for this challenge will be. Okay, so this one is Sandra's pick. Ooh, Broken Bonds by J. Brie. Bold pick. Very bold. Sandra predicts that this is going to be a scrap. The comment says, I don't believe this will be the exception, but I wish it would. It will make some room. So this is the first book in the Bonds That Tie series by J. Brie. What Sandra means when they're saying that they hope that this is the exception is that I don't like reverse harem. However, I have read a book by J. Brie that is not reverse harem. It's a fated mate story called A Crown of Oaths and Curses, and I really enjoyed it. So instead of unhauling this when I unhauled pretty much every other reverse harem book that I own, I'm pretty sure that there's one in here that I didn't know was reverse harem until somebody pulled it out on some sort of recent video, whether it was the last Shelve It or Scrap It, or maybe the Stacks video that my patrons are pulling from. But aside from these, I have done my best to get rid of all of my reverse harem, because it got to the point where it was just feeling like it was a trope that was never ever going to work for me, and I felt like I was hate reading, which felt insulting to people who genuinely really enjoy that trope, and I didn't want to do that. I hate reading. It just feels pointless to me. So I got rid of all of them aside from this one because I'd enjoyed J. Brie previously, and I was like, okay, so if I do enjoy a reverse harem story, potentially J. Brie is the author that's going to make it work for me. Now, I don't know anything about it aside from the fact that it's reverse harem and that it's fae, so I'm going to be going into this pretty blind. It actually has the typical kind of indie synopsis. I can't help but read it in like her early 2000s fake badass voice, where it's like, after the death of my mother and her bonded, I was relieved to find my own bonds. I was sure everything would be okay if I had them. It wasn't. Do I continue on in this voice? Do I have to? Okay, fine. You made me. The fate of our people is in my hands, and I know we're better off if I'm alone. After 5 years on the run, I'm caught and dragged back to face the men I ran away from. I thought I was doing the right thing. Now, I'm not so sure. North, Knox, Griffin, Atlas, and Gabe may never forgive me, but one thing is for sure. I will never forgive myself. So yeah, that was about as enlightening as I expected it to be, aka not at all. I'm pretty sure this is on KU though, which is great because that means I get to read it on my Kindle, which is currently my preferred way of reading. It's just so easy, especially when it's cold. And it is a little bit chunkier than the books that I've read so far. It is 418 pages, but the text is actually pretty large. And to be honest, I'm going into this with an open mind because, like I said, if this trope is ever going to work for me, it's probably going to be by an author that I've enjoyed before. But at the same time, at the first sign that I'm maybe not enjoying this, I'm not going to hold out hope that it's the exception and it's going to be a DNF. So thank you so much, Sandra, actually, for pushing me to pick this one up to find out if I am actually going to enjoy it, because to be honest, I have been putting it off a little bit because I don't want to start another series by J. Brie when I haven't finished the other one that I started. Oopsie. So I cleaned out, reorganized the spare bedroom today, and it's looking absolutely fabulous. But while I was doing that, I did start the audiobook of Broken Bonds, which I know I said that I was going to be reading the ebook of this, but the audiobook is available on Everand, and actually in terms of it being an audiobook, it's pretty decent. This is also an incredibly fast read, as I thought that it was going to be, with the text being pretty large, because I'm 125 pages into it and there's only 3 hours of the audiobook left on 2x speed. So if you wanted to get into this and you prefer audiobooks, then I would definitely recommend potentially going that route with it. However, I am going to be DNFing this and scrapping it. So the audiobook is a good time. The book, however, I just don't think is for me. And actually, it's not even because of the reverse harem elements, which we hardly got into in here. It kind of just throws you in almost in the middle of a scenario, because as we established in the synopsis, this girl is running away from the bonded, which from what I can gather, people who are especially strong, so they can be male or female, will be biologically assigned a number of romantic partners, or like life partners, I guess. In the prologue, we meet this girl when she's younger and she's in a car with her family. She's got her mum, she has 3 dads, and everyone dies in this crash apart from her. We then skip to chapter 1 where she's being pulled in because she's been on the run. Everyone is furious with her because apparently running away from your bond is a big no-no. So they stick a GPS tracker on her and they enroll her into a university. Now, I haven't met all of the men at this point, but they all have like various jobs, various personalities. I think one of them is a councilman, one's a professor, one is a student, 2 of them are students, I think, actually. The reason why I'm DNFing this, why I'm not into it, is because it is very much giving Zodiac Academy. It also very much leans into the attitude of the synopsis. You know, when I said it kind of reads like a early 2000s like badass indie romance tone, that is definitely what is coming through here. Not only does it remind me of Zodiac Academy, it also reminds me of kind of like the young adult paranormal that we were all eating up in like 2008, 9, 10 off the back of Twilight, and that is just not who I am anymore. I can't get invested in this. So while the audiobook was a decent time, I actually spent a good amount of time listening to it earlier, and I'm currently working on the Christmas crochet along, which I still have not finished. I'm on week 4, which is the fairy lights, which as you can see are just starting to take shape around the edge. So Curtis is currently playing Rock Band, so I put my Kindle down and was like, okay, I'll carry on listening to this audiobook while I crochet, and I can't do it. I'm not invested. And now that I'm kind of like less active, because this is obviously taking up less, I guess, brain power than cleaning was, I don't care enough about it to continue. So yeah, it is going to be a DNF. Tone wise, it isn't really for me. And obviously I said like I've already started a different Jabri series. That one is very much in the style of like high fantasy romance, which is what I typically read, as opposed to like more paranormal or urban fantasy romance, which we all know ain't my bag. I will say though that in terms of it being a reverse harem, one of these guys I did actually really like, and I think that that was Atlas. If you've read this series, it is the one that starts off at the beginning with texting her, so the rest of them are in the same location, and one of them is at a college and he can't transfer mid-semester, so he texts her and he's like, oh hey, by the way, I'm one of your bonded, I'll see you in a couple of months, I can't transfer classes mid-semester. And I really liked. Everyone else I kind of didn't really have any opinions on at this point. I do think that this series is a slow burn as well, with not a ton of romance in this first book, so maybe it would have been a hit for me on that regard. But I do find it funny that the reason why I was unsure about this is because of the reverse harem, but actually the thing that is making me DNF this and scrap it is the style and like the tone of the book and the plot in general. I am on my way to bed because it is late and I'm tired, but I wanted to pick book number 5 before I went so that I'm set up for tomorrow. So let's see what we're gonna get. This one is Jenny's pick. Okay. Ooh, Tempest of Tea. Interesting. And this is a predicted shelve. It's literally next to the bottom in the first stack. I'm not looking forward to this. So this actually feels very reminiscent of what just happened with Jabri for me, actually, because Jenny has predicted that this is going to be a shelve, which makes a lot of sense because one of my best books of 2023 was We Hunt the Flame by Hafsa Faisal. However, I have still not finished that duology, and now I'm going to be starting a new Hafsa Faisal series. Now I do hope that I enjoy this one. However, it does have some themes that I don't typically love. Is it historical? We have no synopsis. It's a reimagining of 1920s London. I know that I've seen some character art that kind of has like the aesthetic. Is there any? Yeah, like this. So not my favorite time period, especially set in London. And I'm pretty sure that this also contains vampires, which not my favorite creatures either. I prefer fantasy as opposed to like paranormal supernatural creatures. I know that this had like very middling reviews. Some people enjoyed it, some people didn't. But actually very recently I've posted my worst books of the year list and somebody has commented on that in the last few days and said that this was indeed their worst book of the year. This one could go either way, like with the Broken Bonds by Jabri, because I have loved a book by Hafsa Hassafisel before, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to enjoy this one because this one has themes that I don't typically enjoy. I am excited to find out. However, I really, really love this Fairy Loot edition, and this is a pretty recent one. Is it from February? March 2024. I mean, I haven't looked to see if the sequel to this is coming out in 2025, but having already read A Tempest of Tea will let me know if I need to pick up the Fairy Loot edition of the sequel when it is released. It's actually a really short one as well, which I said when I added Godkiller to my January TBR. Short fantasy is a red flag for me normally. It's a little bit different with YA fantasy, especially because this is set in a version of our world as opposed to like a full high fantasy world. But typically I like my fantasy books thick. In terms of the synopsis of this one, like I said, this book doesn't have one, which is weird because normally even when it is an exclusive Fairy Loot edition, it does still actually have the synopsis on the little flaps. It doesn't say anything on the Fairy Loot spoiler card either, really. But from what I can remember, it is about a girl who has a tea shop for the underground. I think it has a heist in it. It is vampires, as I mentioned earlier, but that is pretty much the extent of what I can tell you at this point. So I have just gotten off sprints with my patrons, and it is not good news, guys, because I am not enjoying this book. I have read 88 pages of it, and it is a little bit earlier than I would usually like to DNF a book, especially when it's a book with precedent, which this one is. Like, I've enjoyed books from Hassafisel before, and I also had this on my anticipated releases of 2024, so it's a book that I generally, like with Air by Saboteur, would put a little bit more time into before I decided to DNF. But honestly, like with Air by Saboteur, there is not a lot that I can say that I'm actually enjoying about this book at all. And to be fair, 88 pages is 25% of the book, so it's a quarter. I am bored, but I wouldn't necessarily at this stage say that the book is boring because I'm not kind of far enough into it for anything to really happen. We are still very much in the setup of this story. However, like I said when we were talking about the synopsis of this one, it is not a time period or a setting that I typically enjoy. So what has happened in this book is that I am so turned off by the tone, the setting, and the atmosphere of this book that I am incredibly disinterested. And even if something amazing happened in this book in the next 50 pages, I'm kind of at the point where I wouldn't really care because it just doesn't really feel like it's for me. So it's not that the book is boring, it's that I am disinterested in it. And it's actually, in terms of the tone, the writing style, the writing's fine, the writing's good. In terms of like the way that it's written though, and the way that it's making me feel with the tone and the atmosphere, it is reminding me a lot of the Infernal Devices series by Cassandra Clare, which I'm a big Shadowhunter fan. I've only read the Infernal Devices, the Mortal Instruments, and the first of the Dark Artifices books because as the Dark Artifices was being published is kind of where I was like growing out of typical YA. So I haven't read all of them, but I won't ever read any more of the historical Shadowhunter books because I was so bored by the Infernal Devices. I didn't like the clockwork plot that you have going on in there, but it was the setting, and which once again was like London, although I think that that is somewhere in like the 1800s, but it was the setting and the atmosphere created by this kind of time period in London. Like I've said before, the particular time period that I don't like is, it's quite a big one actually. It's anything from like the early to mid 1800s all the way through to like the 1980s. So I like the 80s. Anything before that and after 1800 I just don't like it, and I can't say why, but I just find it so uninteresting that it's not something that I ever would reach for. And there are books that have worked for me in the past that have been set in that time period, but typically it's something that I don't reach for. And if I see it in a synopsis, like if this wasn't a Hassafisel book and I'd have seen that in the synopsis, I probably would have decided against picking it up because it is simply not for me. And actually the last Fairy Loot book that we got, which was it Language of Dragons, that is also set in the 1920s in London, and I said the same thing about that in my unboxing. Like, I'll obviously give it a try, but it's not something that I think I'm going to enjoy. And that is once again because I expect the tone, the setting, and the atmosphere to be very similar to this, and also like the Infernal Devices. I am upset because the character art in here I love, and I gotta say I didn't really enjoy what I saw from the characters in here. Nobody was really standing out to me, and I don't know what it is because I do feel like there was a lot of terminology of the world and like place names just kind of being thrown around without being adequately established or introduced at a pace where like I felt I was getting a good grasp of the world. I feel like it very much relies on the fact that it is modeled on a real time period, even though it is fantastical, that you can kind of just like fill in the gaps. But I didn't feel like I had any issues like with the world or like knowing what was going on or understanding the magic system when I was reading We Hunt the Flame. But I don't know what is so different about this one. I mean, the only real difference between the series, I guess, is that this has a larger cast of characters and it is in a more urban, like the setting is very different. This is set in the same world though as Hafsafeil's other duology, because one of the characters, which is this guy here, mentions that he's from the same place that is set. So I do think, assumedly, based on what I've read, it is just that they are set in the same world, not that the plots are linked in any way. Unlike Air, which I was shocked to find out was like a direct continuation of the, oh my god, what's the series called? An Ember in the Ashes, the Ember Quartet. That's the one. So yeah, this is a DNF. I don't know why because like this normally doesn't happen to me. If I like a book by an author, then typically I like the author, and I'm very, well, I mean, there's some authors that is very much not the case for, like V. Schwab. I have 5-star books from V. Schwab and 2-star books from V. Schwab. But generally, like if I like one series by an author, I really enjoy the majority of what they write. And if it's not like a new favorite, like if I don't enjoy it as much as the thing I've already read and loved, I still tend to actually enjoy it. It's weird that I really didn't like Realmbreaker, which was already touched upon by Victoria Aveyard, DNF'd Air, and now I'm DNFing A Tempest of Tea. I'm sad. I'm really sad. So for what will hopefully be our final book of this vlog, I mean, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because we are at book 6, which is the last required book for this video. But also I've DNF'd 3 and I finished 2. So ideally I would like to read a book that I enjoy, but that would mean that we would have to go for a book 7 from the shelves, potentially. So maybe, hopefully, maybe not, our final book of this video. Please, guys, do not do me dirty. Okay, this one's Ruby? Yes, Ruby. Oh! Ruby. You have not done me dirty. I am low-key excited for this. So Ruby has recommended The Deal by Elle Kennedy. So do I want to get into a sports romance series right now? Not really. But do I want to read like an angsty new adult romance? I kind of do, especially because this is so hyped. This is like old school as well. I remember when the romance girlies back in the day, when there weren't many of them, all loved this series. And it's signed because I have met Elle Kennedy before. I think this was the first rare that I went to. And it is from 2015. This is a series of hockey romances, I think. And I think that this is a girl who is trying to tutor someone. So it's fake dating, and the bad boy, who is also on the school hockey team, is trying to be a professional hockey player, but his grades are plummeting, so he needs somebody to tutor him. And the main character doesn't have any dating experience, or she's trying to make this other guy jealous. So they make a deal where if he fake dates her, then she will tutor him, and obviously it ends up being a romance. So I am expecting to like this just because of the kind of romance it is from the era that it was published. However, this will be my first sports romance because I DNF'd the last one, which was Cleat Cute, which is a sapphic one about football, because it was just so about football and I so dislike football that I was like, I can't read it. So it really depends how present the sport is in here, because just generally I'm not a sports girly. Like, I like fitness, I like working out, I don't like sport at all. So depending on how present that is, depends on how much I'll enjoy this. I'm expecting it to kind of be like things like a Cinderella Story, like the movie with Hilary Duff and Chad Michael Murray, where he is a football player, so there's like football games within the movie, but ultimately it's actually like a high school romance. So it's like he's a football player, but it's not all about football, you know, is the vibes that I'm getting from this. This is such a good pick. Thank you so much, Ruby. We've had friends around for the last couple of days for Curtis's birthday, so I've been doing a lot of stuff, which means that I have not updated you. However, I have been reading, and I am now approaching the 3rd act breakup in this book. I'm having an excellent time. So I'm actually very nearly done. I'm on page 328 out of 389, and I am loving this. Now, it started off very rocky and I didn't think that I was going to be getting into it because I felt it was a little basic, and not basic in a bad way. It was just, I feel, very clean cut, like college romance. And I was very right about the split of like sports and romance we have in here. It is in the same vein as things like the Cinderella Story movie, where it's essentially just a romance about two people in college. One is a music major and one is a hockey player. So the hockey itself is a big driving force in his life, but in terms of sports and him actually talking about sports and sports terminology, it is just like the occasional game that he plays and like she attends and things like that. So it's definitely like a sports romance that I can get behind, as opposed to like Cleat Cute, which was just a little bit too sports focused for my liking. But essentially we're following our main character Hannah, who has a crush on a football player. Now our main male character Garrett fails a paper and he notices that Hannah is pretty much the only person in the class that does very well, so he pretty much begs her to tutor him. However, she's like, I haven't got time for this, I've got stuff to do, I'm not interested. And he essentially just like not harasses her, but he annoys her until she accepts. And he notices that she has this crush on this football player, so he's like, okay, I know this guy, I know what he's into, and he's into girls that he has to chase a little bit, so you're gonna hang out with me for a little bit, you're gonna be seen with me, and then he will start to take an interest. So they go along with this, but obviously as this charade is kind of happening, they're spending a lot of time together while she's tutoring him, and they're having to go to social events so that it looks like they're at least casually dating, and they do inevitably, of course, start to fall for each other. Now, each of them has a main conflict in their life, and I actually didn't expect the topics in this book to be quite as heavy as they are, because our main character Hannah was raped at a party when she was 15, so she was drugged and assaulted, and this is something that has affected her life in a number of ways. Like, it has affected her family and the way her family are treated and their financial stability with like the aftermath of this assault, and it also has affected herself and her relationships, where she can't enjoy intimate relationships with people because of the trauma that she's faced in the past. So a big part of this book is her overcoming that and Garrett helping her do so. Meanwhile, he has an abusive father. His father is a very famous hockey player, so Garrett has been pushed to take hockey very seriously his entire life. Now, the bonus is that he actually enjoys hockey. He's also very good at it, and so the drive to play hockey comes from himself and his own ambition and not his father. However, he still constantly has his father breathing over his shoulder. His father is paying for his college tuition, and his father is equally as serious about hockey as Garrett is. And up until this point, Garrett has had the attitude of not wanting a girlfriend. He only has time for one thing in his life, and obviously that starts to change throughout the course of this. But his father was also physically, emotionally and psychologically abusive, not only to him but also to his mother as well, and this is something that kind of plagues him throughout his life, that he starts to kind of work through with Hannah, like she's working through her stuff with him. At the beginning, we kind of established who they were and like what their issues were, but it felt very, I don't want to say overdone, but very standard of a setup for a novel. But it's only like kind of when we got into it and we actually really started to see the chemistry between these two that I actually got really, really invested. And now I'm at a point where like I'm really, really enjoying this, and you know that I'm hooked, because we all know the third act breakup happens in nearly every romance. There are some romances that break outside of that mold. Most of them have the typical third act breakup and get back together at the end of the book, and you can tell when I'm invested when I don't want the third act breakup to happen, because the characters are going to be sad about it. And that is where we're at, where I'm at the point where like it's pretty much about to happen and I am upset. I don't want to read it, and typically because I know it's coming, I'm just like, okay, so this is the third act breakup, and then I read them being sad a bit and then they get back together, but like I don't want it to happen. I'm actively against it. So yeah, you could say I'm invested. In the first like 40% of this, I was thinking about the fact that I was probably going to scrap this one. Now I'm thinking it's definitely going to be a shelve, which is not good for this video, because if this video could end, that would be great, but it seems like we might be shelving the deal. But I will come and confirm in the next 60 pages whether that is going to be the case or not. So I actually finished up the deal pretty quickly last night, and I did end up really enjoying it, to the point where I've low-key started book 2, which is The Mistake, and I'm actually already like 20% of the way through that one, although to be honest, I think this is the longest in the series. When I was looking at stacks of them on Vinted, because I was looking for the rest of the series, I realized that the only one that's even close to this size is The Goal. and the mistake is actually like 100 pages shorter than this one. So you could say that I had a great time with this. I'm surprised and not surprised about it because I like romance. Obviously I do like contemporary romance. It's been a while since I've really loved and really been into contemporary romance, and also I didn't really know how this one was going to go for me with it being a sports romance. I think that I actually picked this up at the right time, where a contemporary romance that has a little bit of angst but without being like, you know, the super problematic, toxic, dramatic ones that I also really like, was just a perfect fit for me. And I was swooning. Like, I started off being like, oh, I don't really feel any chemistry, I don't really care about these characters, and by the end I ended up loving this one. I did give it 4 stars. It is not a perfect 5-star romance for me. I thought that the dialogue was a little bit cheesy in parts, but it does have one of my favorite romance tropes, which is he falls first. So it's hard for me not to enjoy that one, even when it's done even moderately well. And I feel like that also really worked in this book's favor. And it's been really hard for me not to buy this series, okay, because these are the out of print covers. But to be honest, I did think that they were going to be a little bit more difficult to find. However, the full series, like, you can get on Vinted currently for a pretty reasonable price for out of print covers. So I'm not in any huge rush, because the main thing actually that really put me off is that due to our new Shelve It or Scrap It rules, if I buy this series on Vinted, that will be another 4 books technically, because I would just unhaul the other copy of the deal. It would be another 4 books that I hauled this month on top of the 4 or 5 books, I can't remember which, that was in my December unboxing. I also picked up another edition of one of my favorite classics this week, which I maybe shouldn't have done. And I also hauled a PR package of The Devils by Jo Abercrombie. So what would that put me at? That would put me at like 11 books that I needed to read in the next episode, and ain't nobody got time for that. So I'm holding off for now, but this one is definitely going to be a shelve. Because the rest of the series is on Kindle Unlimited as well, there is definitely a chance that I will just read the rest on KU, not feel the need to buy them if this one, like for example, if this one is my favorite in the series, and I can still keep this one on my shelf as a placeholder, because like I said, this one is signed and personalized, so it would be worth keeping just for that, even if I don't necessarily feel like I need to own the rest of the series. So with that in mind, it's time to get these on the romance shelves and pick another book for this vlog, which was unprecedented. I did not foresee this. So we'll see what I end up with. So we know at this point that these shelves are not actually in true alphabetical order, but we're looking for K for L. Kennedy. That's kind of the area we're looking at. So we have Danielle Jensen here, which goes into Christina Lauren, which is fine. But then we have Emily McIntyre and EJ Mello here, and I don't know why exactly. I think it's actually because we have groups of authors a little bit further down where the M's would usually fall. So we can't have, obviously this is a hot mess in general, but I'm thinking, because I don't think this fits here. Yeah, it doesn't. So I'm thinking that maybe we could move this somewhere a little bit closer to where it belongs. So maybe like here, and that we could read one of the Tracy Lorraine books, because all of these were free ones that I picked up at my first rare. So I got like way overexcited at the free book table. There's a chance obviously that Tracy Lorraine is not for me, so I could read one of these and really dislike it and not want to read any of the others. So let's take these 3 off and see what we've got. So I just quickly looked up these 3 on Goodreads, and this one, I think, no, this one has a pretty low rating, and that one's like in the middle, that's a 4.08, and this one's like a 4.2. So I think, because what I want to do is see if this author is for me, I'm gonna go with the one with the highest rating to give me the best chance of enjoying it. So we're gonna try and read The Revenge You Seek, providing that I can get EJ Mello in this gap, which I can just about, and then hopefully L. Kennedy can fit there. So this one, like, what book was it? It was the Broken Bonds series that I tried, wasn't it? That had the super angsty, like, new adult romance type synopsis. This one has exactly the same, and also the Goodreads synopsis isn't really giving me much else. But this one is the first book in the Madison King series, so it is a college romance like the Off-Campus series is. Hi Hammy, how you doing? However, this is a dark bully college romance according to the Goodreads synopsis. It says that it's the first book in Letty and Kane's trilogy, and it is a dark bully romance that contains mature content and demanding alpha hosts that some readers may find disturbing. I was worried that this would be a little bit samey to the deal because it's a college romance, but it seems like this is very, very different tonally, and it does feature a revenge plot. So like I just said when I was talking about the deal, I do tend to like really angsty, dramatic, like problematic, toxic romances, as well as things that are a little bit more wholesome. So there is a potential that I am going to enjoy this, but off the back of the deal, I'm not too sure, because the mood that I'm in is like more of that, and I feel like this is going to be very different. I'm actually probably going to have to pause my read of The Mistake as well, because two college romances, like two contemporary like new adult style romances side by side, I think is a little too samey for me. But I hope that I enjoy this one. It's actually one of the shorter Tracy Lorraine books with 309 pages. It does something that I do enjoy, although I'm not normally too bothered about it with contemporary romance. It's more when it's fantasy romance I care, but it follows the same couple for the entire series, whereas I thought that it was going to actually follow different couples. And I feel like because this is the highest rated of Tracy Lorraine's books, and I'm pretty sure that the other two that I have are also like bully or revenge style romances, that if I don't enjoy this one, I'm probably not going to enjoy the other two as well. So I can just unhaul all three of them and save a little bit of space on my shelves, or make a little bit of space. These ones I didn't get signed as well. I couldn't. Oh no, I did. So that would be sad, because I would be unhauling signed books. This is the problem with Rare. I'm actually glad that I'm taking a break this year. While I do love the event, I have been to too many in a row, and like I said when I said that I wasn't going to Rare, I'm not reading the books quick enough, so I need to kind of make a dent in my TBR, clear through some books on my romance shelves, and then I can start enjoying Rare again. But I'm also 90% sure that this is going to be on KU, so I'll definitely be picking this one up on my Kindle and reading it there as well, because we all know that I'm now a hoe for Kindle. Who saw this coming? Probably all of you guys. I was adamant that this wasn't going to happen to me, but alas, here we are. So I am 820 pages into The Revenge You Seek, and we did have a little hiccup last night because I felt like I hadn't spent very much time reading, and I looked at where I was up to and I was like, oh my god, page 120. It really doesn't feel like I've read that much. And the percentage on my ebook wasn't adding up to like how far through the book that I was, so I was a little bit confused. And then I realized, like, when I opened the ebook, it said that there was a prequel novella, and I was like, I can't be bothered reading that. I don't want to read it. And then when I looked at the physical copy, the novella is already bound in, which is good, because like people who really care about having all of the books and all of the series, like it's hard to get the little novella bits in print form. So it's actually really cool that Tracy Lorraine did that. But what that meant is that I got up to 8 chapters into this book, and then I went backwards and I downloaded the prequel novella, which is free, not even just on KU, like it's completely free. And I read that, which I was hoping that that would give me a little bit more insight into what the beef was between these two, but it hasn't. My main kind of issue with this right now is that it is about this girl and this guy, and the girl, Letty, went to Columbia and she left or got kicked out for some mysterious reason. It's to do with him, but he hasn't seen her for like a year and a half, where they hooked up in the woods at a party, but they have a history that goes back further than that. The guy's brother was sent to juvie, and the guy's brother is dating her sister, but that's fine. They don't care about that because it's only each other that they hate. They don't care about each other's families. But it kind of alludes to like maybe he blames her for that night. But the prequel novella is that night, and nothing super dramatic happened. Like it leaves on a thing where he's like, you did this, and you're like, oh, okay, that's why they're beefing. But that seems to have happened a while ago, because at that point where the prequel novella is set, she's already in college, but apparently he bullied her throughout high school. And so I just don't really understand what the beef between these two is. But essentially she left Columbia and she ends up going to like the local college, and he was held back a year because of the stuff that happened with his brother. He ended up retaking his senior year, so he's now just started at the same college as well, and both of them don't know that the other one attends, and they see each other in the hall, and this like rivalry issue beef between them kind of stirs up again. The thing that's frustrating me the most is that I don't know what it is, and it's doing that really obnoxious thing where it's like, oh, I can never forgive her for all that she's taken from me, but it will never tell you what it is, and it's trying to create suspense. And it's like, no, I just don't actually believe in the depth of this animosity, because you're not giving me kind of like the full picture of what's going on, even when I went back and read the novella. Now, the novella is smutty, and I did enjoy that. I'm glad that I went back and read that, because I feel like I'm just kind of going through the motions with this book, and I'm not really feeling the chemistry between them. When it comes to me and bully romances, they have to be done a certain way for them to work for me. Like, I love Punk 57 by Penelope Douglas, but I hate Zodiac Academy, because I feel like there's no level of chemistry or attraction in Zodiac Academy, and the way that they bully goes like way too far. Like, it's actually just bullying, not a bully romance, in my opinion, from the two books books that I read, and this one is kind of walking a line between them at the minute. It seems like they do have a history where they started off as being friends, and whatever changed between them has turned this guy into like an absolute psycho. So they do hate each other, but they're also extremely attracted to each other. And it's also quite obvious when we read his perspective that instead of actually hating her, he's actually more obsessed with her, which could kind of play into the he fell first trope, because I low-key, high-key actually love it when the love interest has always loved or been interested in the main female character, but she like has absolutely no clue. I don't think that's quite the case here, because I think that she knows that there is attraction between them. I mean, obviously they've hooked up before, but it is like it could play into things that I really like in that way. But at the minute I'm not super into it. It's fine, like I'm kind of enjoying it, but it's not something that's like really gripping me and grabbing my attention. Because this is like a trilogy, I think there's more books in the series and potentially the later ones follow side characters, but because there's 3 books following these characters as well, I'm a little bit worried that the level of relationship that we're going to get in here is not going to be enough for me to care enough to continue on with the series. Which, I mean, shelve it or scrap it. If we're picking a book from the shelves, we're low-key hoping that it's going to be a scrap, so that won't be the end of the world. But obviously, like, I picked this one so I had the best chance of enjoying Tracy Lorraine. And to be quite honest, with the way that I currently feel right now, even if I decide to scrap this book, I don't think that I would necessarily scrap the rest of Tracy Lorraine's books. I think I would give at least one more a try, and if I was kind of feeling as ambivalent about that as I am currently feeling about this one, then I would just be like, okay, Tracy Lorraine is not the author for me. But where we are right now, my feelings are that it's enjoyable, it's fine, but I don't like it enough for it to make any real impact on my life. Very sadly, I've decided that at page 176, I'm going to be DNFing The Revenge You Seek by Tracy Lorraine. I got to the point where there was another smut scene and it was fine, but I still just didn't understand like what the point in this relationship was. Like, I didn't understand why they hated each other, and then obviously they don't hate each other that much because this is also going on in the background. Romance for me, like, I like smutty books, but generally I like it when I feel some chemistry or tension between the characters, or I know their backstory so I feel like the tension through that, or we spent a long time developing the relationship so I understand their relationship. But having smut interspersed by like inner monologues of how much they hate each other while very carefully dancing around the reason why they hate each other, it just wasn't doing it for me. Like, it wasn't terrible, but I wasn't overly interested in it. But the thing that actually made me dislike this book a little bit, as opposed to just like not vibing with it, is these side characters, because there's so many of them. It feels like it's going for that angle where like we establish how well loved the main character is because she has all of these friends, and she has these best friends that are 2 hot football playing twins, and they're just friends, but also like sometimes they sleep in each other's beds and cuddle. No, I wasn't feeling it. Like, it felt like it was telling and not showing in a way. Like, it's trying to build this picture of a character based on how the characters around her act, but I didn't believe it. Like, it felt very surface level and really just took me out of the story. And then on top of that, not really connecting with the actual romantic pairing in here meant that it was just not something that I particularly wanted to continue on with. So this is obviously going to be a scrap, but seeing as I've decided to DNF this as opposed to carrying on giving it like a 3-star rating as I anticipated, I've decided that I'm also going to be unhauling the other 2 Tracy Lorraine books that I own, which means that we have a gap upstairs that we're gonna need to fill. Honestly, that shelf that those books were on was really tight anyway, and I had a book out for my series wrap up which I filmed the other day, and they wouldn't, like, I couldn't get them all back on somehow. I don't know how they were on there in the first place, so I've actually already taken them off, but I'm gonna take a couple of books upstairs to see like if we can fill that gap. And honestly, actually, if I take you guys with me over here, this is a book that I took off my shelves actually at the beginning of filming this episode of Shelve It or Scrap It. I hate when there's like a bus outside because it's a double decker and they can like see through my window. Hey. But I took it off the shelves and I put it over here because I can't add to the stack here and Shelve It or Scrap It. But essentially it ended up off the shelves because I filmed my December wrap up, and Lady of Darkness is a book that I had read in December and it was never on my shelves to begin with because I'd bought it to read in December. So when that went on the shelves as a book that was read, this one came off. The gap is kind of small. Like I said, the shelf was tight. The Tracy Lorraine books weren't very big either, so I think I'm only really going to be able to get this on. But actually I'm going to take up something else just in case, or in case we can't make El Penelope work because of the like author name. So I think I'm also going to take Icebreaker by Hannah Grace, and at least one of these will be going on the shelves and the other one will go in the stacks. This one, it's technically against the rules to put this one in, but I mean, if it's a straight swap, that's okay, right? So this is the shelf where the Tracy Lorraine books were. Like, they were all on here, but now, like, it's just, they're not gonna go. So the book that I took off for the video was Brutal Prince, and we're apparently just never gonna get them back the way that they were. But I feel like this one is actually a really good fit for this space. But yeah, it is perfect actually, but alphabetically it wouldn't go there. So I might need to mix things up a little bit. They're actually a really good fit. That was the 2 books I have in the Fever series by Karen Marie Moaning. I need to continue on with that one, but that means that I have a gap here which has some P's in it. And El Penelope, because this is where Lady of Darkness went, which took the El Penelope space. But I think, can this go here? Yes, it can, but like I predicted, we're not gonna get Icebreaker on as well. So this can just go back into the stacks. This has actually ended up being a far more successful episode of Shelve It or Scrap It than I originally anticipated. Obviously, I anticipated some measure of success because we've ramped up the amount of books that I'm gonna be reading per episode. But I knew obviously that I had read or attempted to read 7 books during this. But in total, we've actually resolved 11 books from my library, which is crazy. With this episode being a Patreon picks episode as well, I did anticipate a higher volume of shelves than we ended up with, because as we know throughout the process, like a lot of the things that my patrons picked were predicted shelves. For me, they were predicted shelves, and they ended up not really working out. And it's interesting actually, because at this point of the month, which is quite late in the month now that I'm wrapping up this episode, I have only read 4 books total. Only 3 of which I've read out of the 7 that I tried in this video. That's not great. That's not a high volume of books turned over at this point in the month. But everything I've read has been a 4-star, because if it's not feeling like a 4-star, then I'm not finishing it. I mean, that's a success, right? Maybe that's how I get a higher average rating and start enjoying books more. But I'm not vibing, I just don't finish it. So for this video, I attempted to read 7 books, all picked by my patrons, 3 of which I really enjoyed, all 4 stars and all shelves. Some of these also very surprising. I kind of expected to enjoy this one purely because everybody does. A Study in Drowning, I was almost certain was going to be a DNF and an unhaul, and I ended up really liking it. And this one could have gone either way. A lot of people really love this series, but it is kind of old at this point. It's 9 years old. So there was definitely potential for me to not enjoy it as much as everybody else did when they read it close to the time of release, or if I had read it at the time of release. But I enjoyed this so much that I'm now like 50 pages into the sequel, which is always a fun feeling. And then in terms of the other 4 that I attempted and DNF, these 2 massive surprise anticipated releases of last year by authors whose books I've previously loved, and these just fell flat for me. This one especially, like I made it halfway through this book and was so bored. This one I didn't make it quite as far in, but the vibes in the world just really weren't working for me. This one could have gone either way, because I've read, once again, I've read from J. Bree before, 4-star read. All of these authors I have read from previously and given them 4 stars and then DNF'd these books, which is madness. And this one could have gone either way though, because it's a reverse harem, but it was actually the tone and the style of the novel that killed it for me. And this one I had absolutely no expectations going in. Turned out it wasn't really for me. Didn't really like the writing and the vibes. And then on top of those 7, we also have an additional 4 that we're going to be scrapping. This is one that I gave, I don't know if I gave it 3 stars, but definitely in hindsight it's like a 2. I actively did not like this. It's a really nice copy, which is why I've hung on to it. And then this one, a duplicate. I didn't like A Study in Drowning quite enough to keep this one. And then these 2 other books by Tracy Lorraine. I mean, I was gonna say I don't really want to be keeping books by authors that I've DNF'd, but then we look at these where it's the other way around, and I've given a book 4 stars previously and now I'm DNFing. And I guess there is a chance that I would enjoy these, but I think with contemporary romance, there's so many like series of standalones that I'm in the middle of where I've really enjoyed the first book, or maybe I've read the second book as well, and I've yet to continue on, because it takes me quite a while to cycle back around to series in general, but especially series of contemporary romances where they're not actually connected because it's like standalone couples. I'm in the middle of this. I'm in the middle of the Brutal Birthright series. I'm in the middle of the Romance Book Club series. Like, there's so many where I've consistently enjoyed them that I should continue on with before I start maybe hanging on to books by authors that I have not enjoyed anything by in the past. So no regrets. I don't think there's anything that I'm sad to let go of. I'm sad to let go of these two just because I thought I was gonna love them, but having not enjoyed them, I'm not necessarily sad to see them go. They're so pretty though. But I've been watching a lot of Bake Off, and what we don't want is style before substance. So they're going. So that was the first episode of Shelve It or Scrap It for 2025. I hope that you guys enjoyed it, and I hope that you guys enjoy the new, not necessarily longer episodes, because that's not what I'm aiming for. I'm just aiming for more books per episode. You can kind of expect these to be posted, I think, around the end of every month going forward, just because they are going to contain more books. I've actually been filming other vlogs alongside to keep my schedule ticking over, meaning that this has ended up being pushed back a little bit further than I originally intended to post it, and I can definitely foresee that happening in the future because I actually anticipated to film this in 11 days less than it actually took. So it took me twice as long to film as I thought it would. So if you're waiting for your monthly Shelve It or Scrap It fix, expect that towards the end of the month. I'm doing my best, guys. It's definitely coming, but not as like early in the month as it previously has been. Let me know down in the comments as well what you think about the new rules and how it worked out with me reading the same amount of books as I hauled in the previous month. I think it worked pretty well this month. I don't feel overwhelmed, even though, like I said, the episode took me longer to film than it typically would. And so far I am comfortable with using these rules going forward. But like I said, the most important thing is that this does not become overwhelming for me, and it's still fun for me to produce for you guys. So we may have to adjust that in the future, but so far so good. So I do hope you have enjoyed this vlog if you've made it this far. If you have, please don't forget to like if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you're a go and nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.